Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're stepping into the world of the Supreme Court, the ultimate decider in American law.
The big one.
Now, I know 235 plus years of history
Yeah.
can seem like a lot to unpack, but trust me, the Supreme Court's story is full of twists and turns and straight-up drama that you won't want to miss.
What's so captivating about the Supreme Court is that it's not just about dusty old laws. It's about the very fabric of our society.
Right.
It's where legal matters become cultural touchstones, where precedents set today can shape the nation for generations.
Okay, so let's break down the basics. We've got 9 justices,
Right.
the big kahuna, the Chief Justice, and 8 associate justices.
Yep.
Their home turf is the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. You know that iconic building with the grand columns where they hash out
Yeah.
some of the nation's biggest legal showdowns?
And these decisions are more than just settling arguments. They have a ripple effect, creating precedents that influence everything from individual rights to the balance of power between the government and its people.
Speaking of picking those powerful justices, it's the president who gets to nominate them. But there's a catch, right?
Absolutely. It's not a one-person show. The Senate has a crucial role to play. They get to give their advice and consent.
Right.
This means they can essentially greenlight or block a nomination.
Yeah.
It's all part of that intricate system of checks and balances the Founding Fathers cooked up.
Okay, so it's not as simple as the president picking their best buddy and bam, they're on the court.
Right.
But here's what blows my mind.
Yeah.
There aren't actually any official requirements to become a Supreme Court justice.
It's true. No minimum age.
Right.
No citizenship stipulations, not even prior experience as a judge. Imagine that you could theoretically go from arguing cases in a small-town court to debating constitutional law at the highest level.
Wow, that's wild.
It is.
But has there ever been a case where a president tried to nominate someone totally unconventional, like a celebrity chef
Yeah.
or a world-renowned astrophysicist?
Well, it's never gone that far, but there have been nominations that raised eyebrows due to the nominee's lack of traditional judicial experience. It makes you think about the potential consequences of this open-ended system, how it could lead to fascinating and perhaps controversial appointments.
That's a good point. It makes you realize that the Supreme Court's history probably has more drama than we realize.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's take a trip back in time. You might be surprised to learn that the number of justices on the court hasn't always been 9.
Oh, really?
It actually went through a bit of an identity crisis, fluctuating between 6 and 10 over time.
Wait, seriously, I always thought it was a solid 9. So what was the deal with all that shifting around?
Well, picture the early days of the United States, a much smaller nation with different challenges. Having fewer justices made sense back then as the nation grew and expanded westward and the legal issues became more complex. The court had to adapt and grow alongside it. It's almost like the court was trying to find its footing, mirroring the evolution of the nation itself.
Okay, that makes sense. But at some point they settled on 9, right? What was the turning point?
That brings us to President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his infamous court packing plan.
Oh, yeah.
In the 1930s, basically, he was facing pushback from the court, which was striking down many of his New Deal programs.
Right.
He saw the court as an obstacle to pulling the country out of the Great Depression.
So he tried to stack the deck in his favor.
Essentially, yes. His idea was to expand the court, adding more justices who would be sympathetic to his policies. But this plan backfired spectacularly. It ignited a fierce debate about the balance of power.
Wow.
And ultimately failed in Congress. The silver lining, the showdown, cemented the 9-justice structure we know today.
Wow. So even attempts to tamper with the court ended up reinforcing its structure. Pretty ironic, right?
Yeah. Ironic indeed.
But back to the justices themselves, they have lifetime tenure, don't they?
That's right. It's a big deal. They serve until they die, retire, resign, or in extremely rare cases, are impeached. Remember Samuel Chase back in 1804, the only justice to ever be impeached, and even he was acquitted by the Senate.
Wow.
This lifetime tenure is meant to shield them from political pressure, allowing them to make decisions based on the law,
Right.
not on what might get them reelected.
It makes sense. They're supposed to be impartial guardians of the Constitution,
Yeah.
not swayed by public opinion polls, but let's be real, their personal beliefs probably still play a role, right?
Of course, they're human beings with their own worldviews, and that's
Right.
precisely why each Supreme Court appointment is so significant. It's not just about filling a vacancy, but about influencing the direction of legal interpretation for potentially decades. It's a legacy that stretches far beyond any single presidency.
That's a weighty responsibility, but hold on, we're making it sound like the Supreme Court takes on every single case that comes their way.
Right.
Don't they get like tons of petitions every year?
They do. It's a deluge, thousands upon thousands of petitions.
Oh, wow.
But they only pick a select few, usually around 80, to actually hear and issue rulings on.
So how do they decide which cases make the cut? Is there some secret formula they use?
It's a rigorous process. They're essentially deciding which legal questions are the most pressing for the nation, which ones deserve their full attention and scrutiny. They're looking for cases with the potential to have the most far-reaching consequences to set precedents that clarify and shape the legal landscape.
So it's not just about settling individual squabbles, it's about the bigger picture.
Right.
But here's something I've always wondered. Do they actually preside over trials like we see on TV, with witnesses and evidence and all that?
That's a common misconception. While they are the final arbiters in legal battles, most of their work involves interpreting the Constitution and federal laws, not overseeing trials in a traditional sense.
Interesting.
Their focus is on the grander legal framework, the rules of the game, so to speak.
Interesting. So they're more like legal architects than referees in a courtroom.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
They're shaping the very structure within which those courtroom battles play out.
Okay, so we've got 9 justices appointed for life, tackling the biggest legal questions of the day, but their influence doesn't end there, does it?
You're right. It extends beyond those hallowed halls of the Supreme Court building. And that brings us to an interesting concept. Circuit justices. Have you heard of them?
Vaguely something to do with, different regions of the country, right?
Exactly. Each Supreme Court justice is assigned to one or two of the 13 federal judicial circuits now, back in the day. This assignment involved a lot more travel. They actually had to ride circuit.
Wait, like on horseback?
You got it. Imagine them traversing vast distances to different courts within their assigned region, all to uphold justice.
Wow.
It's a far cry from the teleconferencing and emails of today. Thankfully, this practice ended in the early 20th century.
I can imagine horses and buggies versus private jets. That's quite the upgrade. But even though they don't ride circuit anymore, these justices still have a lot of sway in their assigned regions, right?
Absolutely. Their influence is still felt in those circuits, making each justice's reach even more expansive. It's a reminder that their impact extends beyond the confines of the Supreme Court itself.
Okay, let's say you're a hotshot lawyer with a case that's made it all the way to the Supreme Court. It's the big leagues, right?
It's the legal Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. Not just any lawyer can waltz into the Supreme Court and argue their case. You need to be a member of a very exclusive club, the Supreme Court Bar.
So there's like a secret society of Supreme Court lawyers. Tell me more.
It's not quite a secret society, but it is an elite group. Thousands of lawyers are admitted to this special bar every year.
But I bet only a tiny fraction actually get the chance to plead their case before the justices.
You're right. It's a highly sought-after opportunity, a chance to be a part of legal history in the making. Now, before we move on to those who really hold the power behind the scenes, let's talk about something else intriguing about the Supreme Court. Each justice has their own team of law clerks.
I've heard of those clerks. Aren't they like the legal whiz kids fresh out of law school and ready to conquer the world?
Exactly. There are the bright young minds who do a ton of research writing and prep work for the justices.
That must be an intense job working alongside these legal giants. I bet those clerks have a lot of influence.
Their influence is undeniable. They play a key role in how cases are analyzed,
Right.
how arguments are framed, and even how the final opinions are written.
Yeah.
They're the unsung heroes of the Supreme Court, shaping legal decisions that affect the entire nation.
Wow. It's amazing how much power and influence is concentrated within those Supreme Court walls.
It really is.
And speaking of power dynamics, no conversation about the Supreme Court would be complete without talking about the age-old debate, judicial activism versus judicial restraint.
Ah, yes, the classic dilemma.
Yeah.
Of how actively the court should shape policy through its rulings. Should they stick to a more limited role, deferring to the elected branches of government, or should they be bolder, using their power to push for social change? It's a question that has been debated for as long as the court has existed.
Okay, so broke it down for me. What are the key arguments on each side, and how does this tension play out in real life?
Well, on the one hand, you have those who believe in judicial restraint.
Right.
They argue that the court should stick to interpreting the law as it's written, avoiding any attempt to make policy or legislate from the bench.
Right.
They believe that unelected judges should be wary of overstepping their bounds, leaving major policy decisions to the elected branches of government.
So they're essentially saying, stick to the script, judges leave the lawmaking to Congress.
Exactly. On the other hand, you have proponents of judicial activism. They argue that the court has a duty to protect individual rights and uphold the Constitution, even if it means going beyond a strict interpretation of the law. They believe the court should be a force for progress, especially when other branches of government are failing to address critical issues.
So they're more willing to push the boundaries to see the Constitution as a living document that needs to evolve with the times.
Right, and we can see this tension play out in some of the most historically controversial decisions, like Roe v. Wade.
Ah, yes. The landmark case that legalized abortion, it sparked a firestorm of debate, right?
It did and continues to do so. It's a prime example of how the court's decisions can have a profound impact on society, touching upon deeply held beliefs and values. This tension between judicial activism and judicial restraint is at the heart of many of the court's most significant rulings shaping the legal and social landscape of the nation.
Wow, that's fascinating. So even though the court has been around for centuries, it's still grappling with these fundamental questions about its role in society.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court is a dynamic institution constantly evolving as it interprets the Constitution in the context of contemporary challenges.
Okay, so far we've explored the structure of the Supreme Court, the selection process, and the debate over judicial activism. But I'm curious to learn more about the people behind those black robes. The justices themselves. What makes them pick? What are their backgrounds and philosophies? And how do their personal experiences influence their legal interpretations?
Excellent questions, and that's exactly where we'll pick up next time, delving into the lives and legacies of the Supreme Court justices, both past and present.
Welcome back. Last time we dove into the mechanics of the Supreme Court, like how it's structured, how justices are chosen, and that age-old tug-of-war between judicial activism and restraint.
And we left off with a tantalizing question. Who are these individuals who wield such power? What shapes their views?
Right.
Let's unpack that a bit.
Perfect, because I'm dying to know more about the human side of the court. It's easy to imagine them as these robotic legal machines.
Right.
But they're real people with backgrounds, experiences, and maybe even a few quirks, right?
Oh, absolutely. Their life stories are fascinating, and often you can trace threads from their past to the decisions they make on the bench.
Yeah.
Take, for instance, a justice who grew up in a rural community.
Yeah.
That experience might shape their perspective on cases involving land rights or environmental regulations.
That makes sense. Their upbringing could influence how they interpret those issues.
Yeah.
That's like those nature versus nurture debates. How much of their legal thinking is shaped by their personal history versus their legal training?
Precisely. And it's not just their childhoods. Their professional experiences also play a role. A justice who spent years as a prosecutor might view criminal justice cases differently from someone who primarily defended those accused of crimes.
So it's like looking at a tapestry.
Yeah.
All these different threads woven together to create a unique perspective. It makes you realize that there's no such thing as a truly objective judge, right?
It's true. Every justice brings her own lens to the court, and that's why it's so important to understand the individuals behind the rulings, their personal philosophies, and how they view the role of the court in society.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into some examples. Are there any justices, past or present, whose backgrounds really stand out and whose personal stories shed light on their legal decisions?
Oh, there are so many fascinating figures throughout the court's history. Let's start with someone whose story really encapsulates the idea that personal experiences can shape a justice's outlook. Thurgood Marshall. He was the first African-American justice on the Supreme Court, serving from 1967 to 1991.
Thurgood Marshall. That name rings a bell. Didn't he argue the landmark case, Brown v. Board of Education, the one that desegregated schools?
That's him. He was a brilliant legal mind and a tireless advocate for civil rights. Long before he joined the court, growing up in the segregated South, he experienced firsthand the injustice of racial discrimination.
Wow.
He saw how the law was used to uphold segregation and deny basic rights to African Americans.
So when he became a justice, he brought that lived experience to the court. He knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of discrimination, to see the law used as a tool of oppression.
Exactly, and it informed his legal opinions. He consistently championed the rights of marginalized groups, pushing for greater equality and justice for all Americans. His decisions reflected his deep commitment to social change, a commitment forged through his personal struggles and his decades of fighting for civil rights.
That's powerful. It makes you realize that the Supreme Court isn't some abstract ivory tower institution. It's made up of individuals with unique experiences and passions, and those personal stories can leave a lasting mark on the legal landscape.
Absolutely. Another fascinating figure is Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court. She served from 1981 to 2006.
Wow, the first woman on the Supreme Court. What a trailblazer. I'm curious to learn more about her background and how it influenced her approach to the law.
Well, she had a diverse career before joining the court. She served in the Arizona State Legislature, worked as a private attorney, and even served as a state judge. This varied experience gave her a broad perspective on the law and a deep understanding of how it impacts people's lives on a day-to-day basis.
So she wasn't just a legal scholar. She was someone who had seen the law in action, working with real people facing real problems.
Exactly. And her decisions often reflected a pragmatic, common-sense approach. She was known for her ability to build consensus, often acting as a swing vote in closely divided cases.
That's interesting. So while some justices are known for their strong ideological leanings, she was more of a bridge builder, someone who could find common ground even on controversial issues.
That was one of her strengths. She understood the importance of compromise and finding practical solutions that could work in the real world. It's a quality that's perhaps more valuable than ever in today's increasingly polarized political climate.
Okay, so we've got Thurgood Marshall championing civil rights,
Yeah.
and Sandra Day O'Connor building consensus and finding common ground. What other fascinating figures should we explore?
Well, how about a justice known for his sharp intellect and his sometimes controversial opinions? Antonin Scalia. He served on the court from 1986 until his death in 2016. He was a staunch advocate for what's known as originalism, the belief that the Constitution should be interpreted according to its original meaning.
Originalism. That sounds like a pretty strict approach. So he basically believed that we should be bound by the Founding Fathers' intentions, even centuries later.
Essentially, yes. He argued that judges shouldn't try to update the Constitution to reflect modern values or social trends. He believed that doing so would undermine the stability of the law and give too much power to unelected judges.
That's a pretty bold stance, it seems. Like it could lead to some pretty rigid interpretations, especially when it comes to issues that the Founding Fathers couldn't have even imagined, like the internet or artificial intelligence.
You're right, it's a philosophy that can be quite controversial, and Scalia was certainly a lightning rod for criticism, but he was also a brilliant legal mind and a captivating writer. His opinions, even those you might disagree with, were always thought-provoking and engaging.
So even if you didn't agree with his conclusions, you had to respect his intellect and his unwavering commitment to his principles.
Precisely, and that's what makes studying the Supreme Court so fascinating. It's a battleground of ideas, a place where brilliant minds clash and where personal philosophies shape the course of legal history.
It makes you realize that these aren't just names on a page. They're individuals who have helped define what America stands for better or worse.
And their influence extends far beyond their time on the court. Their decisions continue to be debated and analyzed, shaping legal arguments and influencing how we understand our rights and freedoms.
It's like their voices echo through the generations, reminding us that the law is a living thing, constantly evolving as new generations grapple with the meaning of justice and equality.
Beautifully put. And that brings us to the present day. We've looked at justices from different eras, each leaving their mark on the court. But now we have a new generation of justices facing a new set of challenges.
That's right. We're in a time of rapid social and technological change, with new legal questions popping up faster than ever. It makes me wonder, how will this current court, with its own mix of personalities and perspectives, navigate these uncharted waters?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's what makes following the Supreme Court today so captivating. We're witnessing history in the making as these justices wrestle with issues that will define the 21st century and beyond.
Okay, so we've covered the justices themselves. Well, let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about the power they wield, but what about the forces that try to influence them? We touched on the political battles surrounding nominations, but what about the everyday citizens, the media, and all the other players who try to sway the court's decisions?
That's a crucial aspect of the Supreme Court's story. While they're supposed to be insulated from outside pressure, they don't operate in a vacuum. They're constantly bombarded with information, opinions, and arguments from all sides.
So it's like they're at the center of a whirlwind with all these different forces swirling around them, trying to pull them in different directions.
Exactly, and understanding those forces is key to understanding how the Supreme Court really works. It's a dynamic ecosystem, a constant push and pull between the justices and the world they inhabit.
Okay, I'm ready to explore this ecosystem. Let's dive into the world of Supreme Court influencers. From passionate activists to powerful lobbying groups to the media shaping public perception.
Let's do it, because understanding who's trying to influence the court and how is essential to grasping the full picture of this powerful institution.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Supreme Court. We've covered a lot of ground, from the justices themselves to the historical battles that have shaped the court. But as we've seen, the court doesn't exist in a bubble.
That's right. It's constantly being tugged and pulled by various forces, all vying to influence its decisions. Think of it like a giant magnet, attracting all sorts of metal shavings: activists, lobbyists, legal scholars, the media, and even everyday citizens.
So it's like this constant dance between the court and the outside world.
Precisely. It's a dynamic relationship where the court shapes society, and in turn, society tries to shape the court. It's a fascinating push and pull that makes the court such a vibrant and relevant institution.
Okay, let's break down these different forces. First up, activists. I imagine they play a huge role in trying to sway the court's decisions, especially on hot-button issues.
Absolutely. Think about landmark cases like Brown v. Board of Education, which desegregated schools, or Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. These rulings didn't happen overnight. They were the culmination of decades of tireless activism, of people taking to the streets, organizing legal challenges, and shifting public opinion.
So it's not just about legal arguments, it's about creating a social and cultural climate where change becomes inevitable.
Exactly. Activists understand that legal change often goes hand in hand with social change. They work to raise awareness, build coalitions, and pressure those in power to address injustice. Their goal is to create a groundswell of support that can't be ignored even by the highest court in the land.
That makes sense. It's like they're laying the groundwork, creating the conditions for legal change to take root and flourish. But what about lobbying groups? I know they spend a lot of money trying to influence lawmakers, but do they also target the Supreme Court?
They absolutely do, though. Their approach is a bit different. While they can't directly lobby justices like they do with members of Congress, they can try to influence the court's agenda and shape the legal arguments that are presented.
Okay, so how do they do that? Do they, send the justices fancy gift baskets or invite them to swanky parties?
Not quite. Their methods are more subtle. One tactic is filing amicus briefs, also known as friend of the court briefs. These are legal documents that present arguments and perspectives from parties who aren't directly involved in the case but have a stake in the outcome.
So it's like they're trying to whisper in the justices' ears, offering their own legal analysis and hoping to nudge them in a certain direction.
That's a great way to put it. They're trying to provide information, shape the legal debate, and ultimately influence how the justices interpret the law. Another way they exert influence is by supporting legal organizations that represent clients in cases that align with their interests.
So it's like they're playing a long game, investing in legal battles that could eventually reach the Supreme Court and set precedents that favor their cause.
Precisely, they understand that legal change is often incremental, and they're willing to play the long game to achieve their goals. Now, let's not forget about the media. Their role in shaping public perception of the court is enormous.
Oh, absolutely. It seems like every Supreme Court decision these days makes headlines and sparks endless debates on cable news and social media.
It's true, the media plays a crucial role in framing how we understand the court and its decisions. They can highlight certain aspects of the case, emphasize different legal arguments, and even influence public opinion on the justices themselves.
It's like they're acting as filters, shaping our understanding of what's happening within those courtroom walls. But can media coverage actually sway the justices themselves?
While justices are supposed to be impartial and make decisions based solely on the law, they're not immune to public pressure. The constant media scrutiny, the op-eds, the protests, all of it creates an environment that can subtly influence their thinking.
It's like they're performing on a national stage, knowing that every decision they make will be dissected and debated by millions of people.
Exactly. And that awareness, that feeling of being constantly observed, can have an impact even if it's subconscious. Now, let's not forget about the everyday citizens. We might not have the same resources as lobbying groups or the reach of the media, but our voices still matter.
So how can ordinary people make their voices heard when it comes to the Supreme Court? Do they write letters to the justices, hold protests outside the court?
Those are definitely options, and they can be effective ways to raise awareness and put pressure on the court, but perhaps the most powerful way we influence the court is through our votes.
Ah, yes, the power of the ballot box. It all comes back to elections.
It does. Remember, the president nominates Supreme Court justices, and the Senate confirms them. So by choosing our elected leaders wisely, we're indirectly shaping the composition of the court.
That's a powerful reminder that the Supreme Court isn't some distant, untouchable entity. It's ultimately accountable to the people through the democratic process.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we, the citizens, have a say in shaping the future of the court and the direction of the law.
Beautifully put, and that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We've explored the inner workings of the court, the personalities of the justices, and the forces that swirl around them.
Wow, what a journey. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the Supreme Court, its complexities, its power, and its profound impact on our lives.
I'm glad to hear that it's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating institution with you. I hope you continue to follow the court's decisions, engage in the debates, and exercise your right to shape its future.
And that, dear listeners, wraps up our deep dive into the Supreme Court. We hope you found it as enlightening and engaging as we did. Until next time. Stay curious and stay engaged. The future of the law is in your hands.